Hello and good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you to our new podcast on Leaders for Wellbeing, and even more delighted to be joined by Emma. Emma Farrell is a business psychologist and qualified executive coach. She not only holds a master's degree in occupational health from Coventry University, she also specialises in workplace psychology. She's a lecturer at the Business School in North Wales, where she teaches strategic well-being, amongst other topics. And she works as an associate, offering advice and support, and is currently working with Health Innovation Coaching Academy. She's also spent 8 years working with teams and leaders in busy hospitals. And prior to this, she spent almost 10 years working in clinical psychology, mental health services across North Wales, with children and adult services, helping people achieve better outcomes through evidence-based practice, something she is very passionate about. Hello, good morning, Emma. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for that lovely welcome. Yeah, delighted to be here. Thank you.
Great. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's one of a series of podcasts, and leadership is a very important topic, indeed, well-being as well. And RCS, we are a specialist company around well-being, and we're very much focused on supporting individuals in the workplace around their well-being, and also businesses as well, about, changing and supporting cultures within organizations and companies, small companies. And a key part of that for me is around leadership. So it's a great opportunity to talk about leaders and the role of well-being. So Emma, starting off, how do you define well-being, and why is it important in the role of the leader, would you say?
Oh, thank you. Great question to start. So, I think we'd all kind of have our own sort of definitions, our own explanations, really, of what well-being means to us. The World Health Organization describes it as a positive state of being. They say it's about being able to contribute to the world with a sense of meaning and purpose. And those two words will crop up a lot as we go through this. And of course, it's made up of different factors, so kind of societal, economic, environmental conditions as well. So, we can't just have good well-being by ourselves. Can't do this in isolation. We need others. We need resources, and we need a community to help us. And in terms of why it's important for the role of a leader, you've just touched on it, yourself there. Leaders have got such a big role, such an important role to play here. I won't run through it because it's all well documented. You all know this, Vanessa, your listeners will too, but really, really high costs associated with poor well-being. And as leaders, we've got a really important role to look after our staff. You've been there, I've been there. We can push ourselves and we can perform at really, really high levels. We can keep going, we can kind of, push through, and with the absence of well-being. And we can do that, but it's not sustainable in the long term, So our job as leaders, as supporting leaders, is be able to look after people and check in with them as well, and look after their needs.
And for me personally, my personal stance is you can have all the great, fantastic policies and procedures, practices and training. However, in terms of leadership, it's all about the leadership, isn't it? In terms of that direction of travel, but also, promoting a culture where people feel safe and they feel looked after and cared for, and where their well-being is really a priority for any company. And in terms of feeling safe, what role does psychological safety play in a team's well-being, and how can leaders foster that?
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can be perceived as and we hear this quite a lot, all the work that I do, people can sometimes say, well, we've done well-being, and it sort of makes me smile a little bit because things are changing all the time, and there's no such thing as that being kind of once and done. We always need to be checking in with our people. And psychological safety is a brilliant, brilliant way that we can do this. So for those of you that haven't heard this term before, check out the fabulous work of Professor Amy Edmondson, who's done lots of really wonderful stuff around this. But psychological safety, and you can kind of essentially think about it as being very similar to trust, but it's about the freedom to speak up. So it's about relationships, and it's about kind of the Amy Edmondson talks about it as in the the freedom to talk with candor. So that permission to speak openly and honestly. And I always think about it as well, that, if you're with a team, if you're with a, group of people, I think, well, when I leave this room, do I feel safe that I know that they're not going to be kind of, talking about me behind my back or gossiping? If somebody's got something to say to me, they'll address it with me. So that's safe, that as workplaces, we can be honest, we can be hopeful, we can be respectful, but then we can have that healthy, comfortable challenge as well. And that's often my pushback to leaders, really, where I think, well, what are your checks and balances in place? How do you know that people are being honest with you? How do you really hear about what's really going on, around here? And if we get that right, it's amazing. It's amazing what we can achieve. Have you heard of there's something called the iceberg of ignorance? Have you come across that before? Have you heard of that?
Oh, please tell
The
me. It
iceberg
sounds
of ignorance.
intriguing.
I'll share all of these things afterwards if anybody's interested. Um, so it's fun, and I've tried to look into the kind of background of this, and I can't kind of find the study to support it, but it's really well documented. If you pop into Google the iceberg of ignorance, I think it comes from Toyota when they were doing their quality improvement work, sort of 20 odd 30 years ago. It's around this idea that's, if you think about this kind of like a pyramid, sort of an iceberg, if you like, it's this idea that the staff on the ground see like 100%, like 90, 100% of problems. And then it kind of goes up the chain, and it's something crazy, like a really small statistic, like, staff, executives see like a really, really small percent, like 7%, something like that, of the problems in the organization, So anecdotally, sometimes when we see that, we think, well, that kind of resonates, so how do you keep on making sure that communication is good at all levels of the organization? And psychological safety does so much to help with that.
And that's a really powerful image in terms of the iceberg, on the tip of the iceberg, and a really fascinating statistic in terms of such a small percentage that the senior leaders may have oversight of or real insight into, an organization or company. Yes. Interesting. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So in terms of like the day-to-day practices, what could leaders start to do and incorporate into their daily routine to support their own well-being? So looking at themselves, what can they do more of and start doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, again, really, really great question. And it's that time of year, isn't it? I don't know about you, Vanessa, but we're into December now. There's just so much to do. And sometimes when things get busier, again, the tendency is our own well-being can often go out the window. And it's the worst thing we need to, it's the worst thing to do. It's the worst thing to do. We need to look after our own well-being before we can kind of think about other people. And I've got a couple of things that might be useful to think about. So the first one, again, I'm gonna check out another useful thing to have a look at. Somebody called the Psychology Mum. Have you come across her before? She's on social media.
I haven't, no.
She's fab. Check her out, the Psychology
Okay.
Mum. So she does really nice posts and little messages and things if you're on social media. And I saw this morning, she's doing this advent calendar for the mind, right? So she's doing that. I think she's doing like the 12 days of Christmas, where she's chucking out these little hints and tips. And what she says this morning, which I really liked, which I thought I'd bring to you guys today, is what she says is, the research often says that when we try to look after our own well-being or improve our lives, we tend to pick something extra, or we add something in, right? So it might be like, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But what she says is subtracting something from our lives can also have a powerful effect and can actually be more beneficial for our mind and lives. And then she went on to talk about, she said, we're not doing the elf in our house. It made me laugh. That damn elf. So I thought that was very good. And that resonated with something that I did a while ago. I ran in the summer, I ran a big event for leaders, and that was the takeaway at the end, right? So what are you going to say no to in order to say yes to some of the stuff that's come out today, so this idea of a to-don't list rather than a to-do list. Yeah. So thinking about, as leaders, what practice can we incorporate into our daily routine? Think about, what can you say no to? Yeah, rather than kind of, saying yes. So we tend to ramp up. As leaders, again, my experiences, and it'd be interesting to, to see what others kind of think about this, if this resonates. As leaders, there's a tendency, leaders and managers, to think, well, I'm the boss, So I need to know, and I need to have the answers, and I need to be able to do, all the stuff that needs doing. And actually, that's a myth. It's not what makes a good leader and manager at all. It's about being able to empower others, to bring people in, to use the expertise in your teams and in your organizations, which you absolutely do have, whether you've tapped into that fully yet or not. It is a resource there for you. And again, wearing my other hat, which is my coaching hat, learning coaching skills, will be a huge tool in your toolkit. And I was doing some teaching the other night with people, teaching them how to, and so when somebody comes in and says, oh, help, I need help with this, rather than just say, okay, I'll tackle it, or, giving somebody the answer, using some really well-placed questions, where have you been in this situation before that had a good outcome? What have you tried already? What do you need from me? Turning the things around into a question. So you're kind of empowering people, upskilling people to be able to do it themselves, again, is hugely beneficial. So it takes a little bit of, it's about changing habits, changing the way that we do things. But again, in terms of daily practices, that can be absolutely huge. And just one final thing, actually, on that point. I could give you millions, but I'll just give you one more thing. Going back to the evidence and having a look at what the evidence says, kind of in terms of, again, thinking about what kind of practices we can bring in. If we were to look, and again, there's a whole topic on this, but if we were to do this really briefly and think about kind of emotional intelligence for a minute. Yeah. And again, we're looking at this through the lens of being a leader. A big part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness and self-regulation. And what we mean by self-regulation is the ability to just notice and check in with ourselves. Ask yourself that question: what is it like being on the other end of me when I am, stressed, overwhelmed, knackered, tired? What is it like being on the other end of me, right? And just kind of pay attention to that. And then think, well, how do I know? And what's the evidence around me, sort of telling me? One of the biggest predictors, and maybe if you're just going to take one thing away from this little section here, one of the biggest predictors of well-being is the ability to self-regulate yourself. And that's a predictor not only of positive well-being, but it's about, significantly preventing burnout as well. So ask yourself, how can I have better emotional regulation? What does this look like for me? Managing your energy, moving around, giving yourself kind of lots of little different breaks. Do not multitask. That's a massive one. So, ask yourself, what's going to help me have that better emotional regulation?
Brilliant. There's lots of great stuff in there. I particularly like the to-don't list. There's lots
What would
of...
you do? What would you do, Vanessa? What would be on your to-don't list?
Gosh, I'll have to think about that one. But I think that's a really good idea of the to-don't list. And maybe I think a key one for me is don't worry too much, too much if you don't get everything done at the end of the day. I think a lot of us are, we have a lot of to-do lists, particularly because my memory is poor, but, that we feel that we have to get through things. And that's okay. What I've learned over the years, it's okay if you don't. I really like that self-regulation, particularly for leaders, who feel maybe a great responsibility or feel that they need to work out for themselves, but also, that self-regulation, what it's like perhaps being at the other end of me, and maybe not when I'm feeling particularly well as well. So I think that inward thinking, that opportunity for self-reflection is really important for leaders.
Absolutely. I like yours. Don't overthink is a good, because again, we can put huge amounts of pressure on ourselves, and I'm very similar, we think I have to get everything right, get everything perfect. I ran an event a couple of weeks ago, and one of the key because we always just ask for like, what's your key takeaway? And somebody put, don't overthink things. And I was like, that's just so true, isn't it? Such good advice.
Absolutely. And that you don't have to figure it out all by yourself. Okay, you may be there in a positional perspective as a leader. However, you don't need to have all the answers. And that's where your team comes in, having a great team around you and supporting your team and focusing in on the team now. How can leaders support team members, particularly when they may be experiencing stress or burnout, or their well-being is being affected, maybe from the work perspective, but also from a personal, because I think there's a lot more blurring these days around stress and anxiety, across both our personal lives and, seeping into our work as well. How can leaders support team members through that?
Yeah, there really is, isn't there? And just to sort of, before I answer your question, kind of just to take a step back from that as well, and just put into context where where we are at the moment. We had COVID, didn't we? We had the pandemic, which in some ways kind of seems a distant memory, and perhaps it's more pertinent for me because I'm still doing a lot of work. I do probably a lot of my work across healthcare, but we are still seeing the after effects of that. We're still seeing, I've seen, with friends and family members, our young people, how that experienced, how that affected them, and how they're kind of experiencing life now in a slightly different way. So, you might have seen, I don't know if it was last summer or the summer before, they were kind of put in concerts and things like that. They were noticing young people kind of having, significant trouble with their kind of mental health and panic attacks and things like that, because it was just so many different rites of passage that they just hadn't experienced. We've got long COVID, we've got changes to the workforce that are happening with people kind of leaving and not necessarily re-entering in the same way. So if you look at that kind of wider picture, add in the financial, the kind of, the difficult financial situation, that cost of living situation that we've had, that's not easing quickly. If you look at the wider context, you just think, goodness me, I think we're all doing amazing for getting up and getting out of bed and going to work every day anyway. So if you kind of, first of all, just take it in that wider context, then we can absolutely see it's different for everybody, isn't it? So what for some person, what is kind of an adequate workload for somebody else is going to feel too much. So that's the first thing. We need to view it very much on an individual basis. Secondly, as well, we really need to think about, again, on an individual basis, but it's looking at the kind of looking at it from an equality, a diversity perspective as well. And we know that people from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, or different ethnic backgrounds, often kind of come out worse, so they'll experience kind of more hardship or more challenges. And again, we need to be, make sure we're doing a much better job at being aware of that, and being open to be able to have those conversations. And again, I would say, often we can think it's very sort of, very, very challenging, but actually it's about knowing your people as best as possible. Again, there's a few different things that we can bring in here. We know our people, we've got good psychological safety, we're creating those good relationships, we're making it safe for people to be able to come to us when they've got challenges. But there's other things that we can do as well. So going back to being able to flourish at work, find meaning and purpose at work, what we know is, when we use our strengths at work, we are more productive, we are happier, we feel more fulfilled, and we do a better job as well. And there's different tools, so you can have a look at, so VIA Strengths Finder is a great one. There's different free strengths tools that you can use. I use them a lot in my coaching with people. Sometimes people come to me and say, I just feel stuck and I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want this. So that's normally a cue for me to get the Strengths Finder out, and we'll explore that together. And you can do that as a manager, leader. You can get people, you can do it yourself, you can get people to do these strengths finders and then look at it together. And then get them to look together and get them to say, well, okay, well, what percentage? Let's look at your top 3 strengths, your top 5 strengths. What percentage of those are you using them at work? And if they're struggling, if they feel like their well-being is poor, there's probably going to be a correlation between how much they're using their strengths and how they're feeling. So then you can use something which is known as job crafting, where it's not always possible, but as far as you can, be able to kind of give them opportunities to be able to use the strengths in that role, right? So if they're not, me personally, I'm not a big completer finisher. I can do it. I've trained myself over the years, but I don't really love Excel spreadsheets. I don't really love, making sure that I've got all of that. And what I've learned over the years is it's really great to be paired up with somebody who is really good at that detail, right? So I can kind of do all the other stuff and the ideas and the evidence and pull it all together. And I've got somebody who's kind of thinking about the detail. Do you know what I mean? So, and again, it's looking at each person as an individual and thinking about how can I create the conditions for them to fly, to succeed? Because that's our job at the end of the day as a leader. That's our job, and making sure they've got the right resources to do that as well.
Yeah, so that sounds like that you need a really good understanding of the individual and, what will help them best in order to thrive within the workplace. And that for me is about being attentive to and listening and really caring for that particular individual, in order for them to feel safe, like you say, and that they can flourish within the workplace. Yeah.
Yeah.
Going a little bit
absolutely. And sometimes it's, sorry. I'm so sorry. I was just getting
Okay.
carried away. And I was just going to jump in as well. And again, it comes down to knowing your people and
Mm,
and sometimes we know we need to dial it down. Do you know what I mean? Because it's that balance, isn't it? Where sometimes, if life is good and everything's going okay, then we can absolutely, go at full pelt and we can deliver on all these different things. But maybe if we've got stuff going on at home or whatever, we just need to kind of be mindful of that. And again, as leaders, it's always just being able to, be mindful of that kind of dynamic situation.
absolutely, because it can change from day to day for
Yeah,
individuals. Yeah.
yeah.
And, we've looked at individual leaders and their well-being. We've opened it out in terms of from a team perspective. But, in terms of the company, maybe a very small company, maybe a larger organization, what steps could they take to prioritize employee well-being?
Yeah, and again, I would, in that typical coach kind of way, I would throw that out as a question, so, and think about, as an organization, how do we get feedback on whether we're doing it well? What do we know about the experience of our staff? So, for example, you as an organization, you might do staff surveys. The larger organization, so one of the biggest data sets in the UK is the NHS staff survey, and response rates tell you a lot. So sometimes, I'll work with organizations and they say, we haven't got any data because, like the annual survey, it was like 18% completed it out of so many thousand staff. And you think, well, that's telling you something in itself. People are not completing the form. What's that telling you? So my advice really is to get really curious about what data you've got at the moment. And if you haven't got much data, what could be going on there? Because sometimes that kind of silence is telling you a lot. But look at your information, talk to your staff, find a range of different ways to talk to your staff and say, what's it like? What's your experience like? What do we do well? What could we do even better? And I like to kind of frame it in that way, right? Rather than like, what don't we do well? Rather than kind of frame it in the negative. Because again, there's lots of evidence to say if we look at and this is where your kind of positive psychology stuff comes from, there's lots of evidence to say, if we look at what's not working, what's known as like a deficit model, if we look at what's not working, we tend to focus more on that and we get more of that, right? It's about shifting your perspective to the direction of travel that you want to go in, right? So what do we do well and what could we do even better, right? What's your feedback for us? And again, there's some fabulous questions out there. So the health and safety executive have got some wonderful tools that you can just crack on with. You can ask people the questions, it puts it into a little Excel spreadsheet for you. Again, there's other tools about psychological safety, again, which you like literally questions are there for you. So you can ask people. And then also what's brilliant, again, I can share the link if that's helpful. What's really great about these questions is, so if you get all this feedback in and just think, oh, I don't know what to do now, the website gives you prompts. So, it gives you prompts to be able to say to people, okay, so I really appreciate your feedback. You've commented that, you'd like more opportunities for, personal development or, whatever it might be. And it kind of gives you prompts about how to engage with people next. Because sometimes we avoid feedback because we're afraid of what it's going to tell us, right? And we just think, well, what if people say this? What on earth do I do then? But actually, again, this, is what I do a lot of work with people about. These issues are there anyway. Just by asking people, you're not creating them. If they're not happy, they're going to leave, or they're not going to do their best work, or they're not going to kind of represent you in the best light because they're going to say to everyone, oh, goodness me, don't go and work there. So actually talk to people and come up with the solutions together. Again, it goes back to, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to have all the answers. People, I think you'd be surprised often at how much people really value and appreciate having the opportunity to be heard and feel like they're part of the solution.
Yeah. And have you any specific examples of how focusing on well-being has positively impacted some of the organizations you've worked with?
Yeah, totally. I mean, on a kind of on a strategic level, again, we've done stuff with very senior leaders who maybe thought, oh, here we go, more stuff on well-being. And I think there is a lot of kind of misunderstanding, perhaps, like it's something soft and fluffy. I think I wrote about this in the last article I did for you. It's soft and fluffy. We're all going to sit around and do yoga and stuff like that. And it's not, it's about this structural well-being. It's thinking about how we manage people's time and energy. But I will just give you an example if that's okay. This is something that's this really, really stuck with me. And it was with a team, actually. It wasn't this particular example. I went in and I was asked to do a piece of work with a ward, and it was, I'm going to say, it was about 3 years after COVID. It was about 3 years after COVID, and I was quite new to this particular organisation. And I went in and I was asked, I think it was around, I think it was kind of to do with like effectiveness, let's say. It certainly wasn't to do with like relationships and well-being. I'm not quite sure what had been communicated with the brief, but anyway, when I got there and walked into this room full of staff, you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. And I'm just getting, I can feel my kind of a knot in my stomach as I'm kind of remembering going back there. And they didn't want to be there. And it was a very small room. It was often, a side room, busy hospital, and everyone was kind of crammed in there. I remember just thinking, crikey, and all plans I had for the session immediately just disappeared and went out the window. And I remember thinking, what am I going to do now? And so I was kind of talking a bit about who I was and why I was there. People were looking at me, just looking at the floor. It was really, really difficult. And so one of the things that I did with them, I did something called, and again, I encourage you to have a little nose at this. They're called care circles, right? And it derives from the work of Paul Gilbertson, Professor Paul Gilbertson, compassion-focused therapy training. And it comes from Aneurin Bevan, did an awful lot during the pandemic with the premise of people in frontline care working in the acute trusts, with the premise being you care for people and who cares for you, right? So that's kind of where it comes from. And since then I've used this a lot with people. And I said to them, okay, we're going to do something different. Put your chairs in a circle, right? So we all kind of switched around. I remember thinking, how on earth is this going to go? And essentially, it takes 20 minutes and it's 5 questions. Super simple. I mean, you could do this. You could do this as part of your team meeting, just part of your away day. I've used this since then. I've used this with all kinds of people, different layers of organizations. And the first question is, tell us something that is going well for you at the moment, right? What's going well for you at the moment? Could be anything at all, right? Anything at all. No pressure. It doesn't have to be anything brilliant. And we all go around and we share one thing, right? It doesn't take long at all. And then you shift your chairs a little bit. And the other important thing to say is, like, you can pass, right? It's just something little, and you can say pass. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. And then, so that's the first one. And then you have a pairs round, and you move your chairs and you sit facing each other to get into pairs. If you have an odd number, the facilitator can join in, which is always a lovely thing to do. And then the question is, what's going on for you at the moment? What's going on for you at the moment? And you get 2 minutes each, and one person listens. And one person speaks, and then you switch after 2 minutes. Just what's going on for you at the moment. That's it. And then you swap over, and then there's a question for you in pairs. How can you take more care of yourself? So again, that's it. 2 minutes. How can you take more care of yourself? That's it. And you switch, and then you all shuffle your chairs back round again, and then you all come round back to that group round again. And the question is, what one thing could you do? Will you commit to moving forward to take care of yourself? That's it. What one thing could you do moving forward to take care of yourself, right? So that's it. But I remember just thinking, oh, crikey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to see how it goes. And the difference in the room just in that 20 minutes was absolutely phenomenal. People were laughing and chatting, and I can feel it in my own energy now. I was thinking, oh, phew, thank goodness for that. But the feedback that came afterwards was, really phenomenal. There was somebody who'd come in, one of the international nurses, and he said to the group, he said, can I just say, he said, I've been here for 2 years and I've never had conversations with any of you like I've just had now. I've got chills thinking about it. He was pretty much in tears. He said, thank you. That's been absolutely great. And it turned out this particular ward was one of the COVID wards. They'd lost over half of the patients had died. It was like nothing they'd ever experienced. The attrition rates from the ward had been horrific. They couldn't retain staff. The staff that were there were just essentially traumatized and hadn't really had any support. None of that came to light until after we did this 20-minute session. And then you couldn't stop them talking. So actually they didn't need, as a terribly, terribly long-winded way to answer your question, but they didn't need a proper intervention as such. What they needed was to feel heard and some space to listen and connect together.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful. The powerful of those conversations in a safe place, being heard, and feeling validated. Yeah, wow, phenomenal. Well done. Well done. Must have been powerful for you as a powerful experience as well.
It's still, and I could, you know what, it makes me feel emotional actually, and that's really one of the wonderful things about my job. And it never sort of, I always still feel nervous when I go into work with teams, particularly where there's teams that I know that have had challenges, and I think that comes from, again, you want to do a good job, you really want to kind of help these people, overcome some of the challenges that they've had, improve their relationships together. But essentially, that's one thing that I've learned over all the years. It's just about connecting with people and helping them, feel heard really, and help them think about and where next. Because actually, I didn't need, because there had been some performance issues in that team, but they had the answers. They knew what to do. They didn't need me. They didn't need me. They worked that out together in that room. And again, like I said, I'm getting chills because the difference, I think, and again, I didn't have a huge amount of time. I think I only had an hour with them. So I'm thinking, what on earth am I going to do in this hour? But just that 20 minutes of getting them connecting, and then you couldn't stop them. Then everything was bubbling away, and the energy that they left the room with was fabulous. So that's probably one of the most moving things I think that I've done. That will always stay with me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Emma. I feel that's been really impactful and insightful in terms of the role of leaders for well-being. And I'm sure our listeners, will gain a lot from that. For further information and in relation to the well-being and support that we offer at RCS for all organisations, both small and large, please get in touch with us via our website and our contact details are posted at the end of this podcast. So thank you again, Emma. Any final thoughts from you?
Oh, thank you so much, Vanessa. It's been really lovely to talk to you today. I could talk to you all morning, I think. Well, in terms of a final thought, I think I would ask. So we're coming to the end of 2024, aren't we? Starting a brand new year. I guess I would let's have two things. Maybe reflect on the last year. What one thing are you proud of and you pleased about from a well-being point of view? And even if it's just we're all still here and we're all still standing, but what one thing are you pleased about in terms of well-being for the last year? And then what is your intention going into 2025? My little boy, he doesn't call them he calls them New Year's revolutions, which all made us laugh. He's only little. So we don't make revolutions or resolutions, but we try and have a little intention. So what could you do 2025 to improve your well-being? That would be my question.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you. And I will share the resources. I'll pass them on to you if you want to share them, Vanessa, and I'll also share them on my LinkedIn page as well, so you can find me on there.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because I'm sure people want to contact you, to have the opportunity maybe to work with you in more detail. So all that will be on our on the podcast as well, and the link. And
fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you once again. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.